the sound fixed from last time?
We replaced the cords.
Okay, I'll now call the meeting to order. The town acknowledges we are on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respects to our First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reconfirm our relationship with one another. Okay, we'll move to the adoption of the agenda. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda?
I move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Okay,
I'll second.
Councillor Wu, seconder Councillor Veddery. All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. We'll have the adoption of minutes of the April 11th meeting. Are there any errors or omissions?
I'll move to adopt those minutes.
I'll second.
Councillor Clausen, second by Councillor Bashara. All those in favor? Okay, motion is carried. We'll now move to number 5, delegations and public hearings. So we'll turn this over to whoever is in charge.
Am I going to jump up to it? So I can just give you a nod to the slides. So, yeah, just tell me, I'll just give you a nod. Okay, thank you very much. Hi, thank you for inviting us. I'm Anna Dinsdale and I work with the Community Safety Wellbeing Branch of Integrated Justice Services. And I lead the Northern Alcohol Strategy. The Northern Alcohol Strategy supports community committees who want to look to reduce alcohol harms across their communities. So that's the work that we do. And I think the first thing that we want to say today in terms of some of the key messages is that we acknowledge that alcohol continues to be a critical issue for many communities, in particular the L'Orange region. That's something we want to acknowledge. I'm going to speak in a bit about some of the context behind CAMP. I'm also going to make a nod to some of the kind of national evidence base that we know, just for context. Because what we do know is that national and local data shows a reduction in alcohol retail hours correlates to a reduction in harms. Adam Kohlberg is here and he's the new CAMP coordinator. I think I'm going to do a lot of CAMP context pieces, but I'm glad that he's made it here today. And he's got a strong communications, community development background, including working for industry. The other key points that I would communicate up front is that NAS is not an abstinence-based approach, and CAMP is not an abstinence-based committee, and we're certainly not anti-business. In fact, I would say that retailers play a really important part in the community, social and economic development of communities. So I think those are really important messages to get across. We know that with the SLGA transition, liquor store transition, that there's an interesting landscape at the minute and an opportunity, I think, for communities to kind of get ahead of the curve and think proactively about how they want to address and approach that issue. I'm going to hand over in a little bit to Dr. Irvine, who is significantly more qualified than me to talk to data, and you know, I think most of you in the room, if not everybody, will know him and know that his background both in L'Orange and in terms of the fact that he was a director of Northern Medical Services, medical health officer for the northern half of the province, and he continues to volunteer with the Tri-Community Camp Committee. So, in terms of the history, a brief recap, I'm going to fly through this very quickly so we can get to Dr. Irvine's piece. So we know that in 2016, Lac L'Orange Region's 3 local governments endorsed a multifaceted 5-year community alcohol management plan. It was inspired by Harold Johnson's work and book Firewater and Changing the Story Messaging. If we jump on to the next slide, why alcohol? So this is kind of hot off the press. This report was released in March 2023. It shows 2 things of note in particular. One, that alcohol continues to cost significantly more than other substances and causes significantly more harms than other substances. Number 2, that the trajectory of alcohol harms has continued to increase, and that's over a 14-year period. We jump on. So Dr. Irvine's going to speak to this in much more detail, but we know that baseline data from November 2017, around the time the bylaw decision was made, baseline data showed that 86% of intended injuries, 72% of unintended injuries that resulted in presentations to the L'Orange Emergency Department involved alcohol, and that was the landscape at the time. If we jump on. So whilst we know that the plan was endorsed in 2016, the first meeting I think was in early 2017. I know that lots of folks in the room I think have had some involvement over the years in camp and in the work of camp. Examples of folks that are regularly in attendance: Shay Duncan on behalf of the Ministry of Education, Laurent Jelks, Cherise Crispin at the moment for HUB, Dean Bridle, more recently Brent Nicol from RCMP. And I think there's an opportunity in these conversations to understand that now we have a new coordinator in place, how the town would like to have that information disseminated and what opportunities there are. If we skip on, the other point that's worth making is that access and availability is just one part of a multi-pronged approach. We know that best practice for alcohol management has to look at a range of interventions across the spectrum, and it's also useful for folks to think about individual interventions, which looks like treatment, and then population level interventions, which looks like access and availability. And so if we then think about access and availability, so if we scroll on, we know that there are multi-pronged approaches to understanding access and managing access and availability, and that goes from limiting liquor sales hours through to enforcement, survey training, and density of outlets are examples. If we keep going, so context for the local data that you're about to see is this national, it's a robust evidence base that tells us that increasing hours of sale does impact on harms. In particular, for instance, late night retail hours are particularly associated with levels of heavy drinking in youth. And if we scroll on, in 2019, the World Health Organization noted that limiting hours of availability is a cost-effective Best Buy approach for communities to think about because of the population level impact it has. And then last, from me for now, keep going. And just a nod to the kind of work that was done in 2017. So the 483 respondents of the survey at the time, 76% said that they believed off-sale liquor outlets should close earlier than 3 AM, and 69% of respondents indicated hours of liquor sales in the region should be decreased. And I'm going to hand over to James for the next bit.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks for the invite to attend tonight. The next two slides, I guess, jump ahead to the next one. So we've just got a little bit of information here, and we're open to questions as well. This is just some information from the RCMP as it relates to their calls involving alcohol as a factor for those calls. The top line is the RCMP detachments in the other parts of the north. And it shows that gradually from 2017 to 2021, there's been a gradual increase regularly each year usually, but it's kind of up and down based on what's going on. But in Laurent, there's been kind of a steady decrease in that. You know, when you think of about 600 calls difference there, so it'd be 600 out of about 3,600. So that's some of the information we get from the RCMP. They provide that data. They get access to it themselves about once a year, and they develop information like this. Next slide, please. So this is the information we shared in June of 2020 at one of the council meetings here. So it's not much different. But overall, we had done a review before the bylaw came into place, 2017. And then after the bylaw came into place, we did another review within the hospital. The doctors and the nurses did extra paperwork on each client, and for a month to review for those over the age of 16, whether they were there because of an alcohol-related issue or not. So overall in the whole month, there's about a 5% reduction in female visits that were associated with alcohol, and about a 3% for males. The greatest reduction was in the youth, 16 to 24, and that decreased from 27 to 18. So that means instead of 27% of the visits being associated with alcohol, it was down to 18%. For the group 25 to 45, there was a larger number reduction, but not a lower there was a lower reduction in percentage. And for unintended injuries, that means slips and falls, things that were not things like assaults and motor vehicle crashes. It went from 72% to 59%. So this is kind of information I shared previously.
Sorry to interject, but just one question I had specifically to the alcohol-related ER visits.
Yeah.
This is specifically you ingested alcohol and had harm done because of the ingestion of alcohol. It wasn't like something where you perhaps had a stroke but alcohol was on board. That doesn't check the box.
Right. Yeah.
Just to be clear.
Yeah. It wouldn't be just a condition, because some statistics will give it had to be a condition that you could only get as a result of alcohol.
Okay.
So if someone was inebriated and they fell and broke their arm, that was counted.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, next slide. Just thought to show you in terms of the absolute numbers and what that means. That's sometimes easier to understand than percentages. So for men in a month, this is over the age of 16, there's a reduction, 72 down to 68. Not a major number, but a reduction. And for women, it was 68 down to 49. So you add that up per year, that's what, 270 less visits. 270 less visits in a year. So, next one. And the real impact seemed to be impacting the injuries. So the one on the left is the one you saw that Anna presented, the initial one that showed a high proportion of the intended injuries, meaning self-harm, suicide attempts, assaults, was very high related to alcohol. For unintended, it was 67 and 26 would not involve alcohol. If you look at the change that occurred, and we did some analysis based on making sure that there's the right amount of days. Both months had the same number of days. Though March had one more weekend, it had one more, or 5 Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. But you can see that the intended injuries, the assaults and suicide attempts, were reduced by 50% involving alcohol. For unintended, the falls, the motor vehicle injuries, those types of things, that was 100% reduction basically there. So close to, almost done. Yeah. So that's for the injuries. Okay, next slide. Now, some may think that's kind of a modest reduction. That, especially if we look at the 5% reduction, 3% reduction. But if we look at what else is happening around us, whether it's Saskatoon, Regina, Ontario, studies in the States, they're all increasing in their visits to the emergency room based on that. I'll show you some slides on that. This just shows the hospitalizations based on alcohol and other substances. And alcohol is the red. Again, hospitalizations going regularly up in Canada as a result of that. And other substances that are down at the bottom. Some of those are staying fairly level. Next slide. Yeah, thanks, Alison. So this is a study here on the left that Sherbrooke, Quebec had developed a community alcohol management plan. And they did a bunch of different things, awareness, working on addiction programs. But they also did some bylaw changes, that ended up being provincial changes, so that liquor outlets close to schools had to only sell low alcohol based beers, low alcohol. You couldn't do the high alcohol beers.
Excuse me?
And so they did that. Oh, sorry.
What province is
That was
that?
Quebec, sorry.
Quebec?
Yeah, Quebec. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know about that stuff.
Well, this shows the one community of Sherbrooke, which is it's kind of a big university town, like Saskatoon. Saskatoon's a lot smaller, but So they wanted to compare themselves with a couple other places. So they initiated their program in about 2017. They were shocked by the study that they found in 2016, because they had done blood alcohol levels on youth between 12 years of age and 26 years of age who were sent to the emergency department because of alcohol. And so they initiated that change and it went down. Saskatoon did the same study, didn't do the interventions, but from 2016 to 2019, just about the same period of time that we have done our two studies, they doubled in the youth between 12 and 26 going to the emergency department. This is Saskatoon University Hospital for alcohol. I talked to the emergency room head the other day just to say, that seems awfully drastic in a 4-year period. He says, no, he feels it was correct, yes. The other thing in Ontario, again, it's youth. They did the study in all the different age groups, so the youth really made the greatest impact. So those between 25 and 29 years of age, for males had a 140% increase. For women, it was 240% increase. So our modest change, I think, has to be put in context of other locations in Canada that, as we see alcohol being normalized more and more. Next slide. Okay, so I hope that's useful, and we can answer other questions for you on that. I think the one thing to recognize that even without a bylaw change, the new store could operate 37 hours more, almost double the number that the previous liquor board store was open on a regular basis, even without a change there. So I think it's important for CAMP to continue to work with community and business and that for this to continue. I'll just
Sure. I think just to bring some of these pieces together, I know that at SUMA, for instance, there was a presentation, I think it was the UVS, that were talking to kind of the opportunity for municipalities to consider what community safety wellbeing plans look like and what that looks like, I think, at a municipal level. And I think CAMP is a step for all three communities to move towards that, and I think that's one of the opportunities that we would flag for you. The other thing is that Adam and I just earlier today, he kindly facilitated a session for us in Prince Albert with the group that is a kind of like CAMP but in Prince Albert, and some local retailers who are really interested in liquor retailers who are really interested in working collaboratively with the group, and I think that's a real opportunity for us here too, particularly with the shift that we've got. So I just want to make a nod to that fact. And I also wanted to draw attention, I should have done it earlier, and apologies, I was clipping through to stay within time. But I know that Sean Groves is a member, stakeholder of CAMP, and he also submitted a letter for your consideration. I just wanted to draw your attention to that. Any questions?
I have a question. Stats are beautiful. 2019, how are we looking now? I don't know, is this 2023 or are we still dealing with 2019 stats? If this is an ongoing, we should be updated regularly or updated or not updated at all.
You go first. You go first.
Yeah, we started in March of 2020 with a follow-up, doing it a year later. But of course, that's a notorious month of COVID. And so by the time we got halfway through the month, we gave up on that because it was intensive work for the nurses and the doctors to do. But we looked at the first 2 weeks and it looked like that was continuing to occur. Since then, I didn't feel that it was appropriate for me to approach the doctors and nurses with COVID going on. Things were so up in the air. Sometimes emergency room visits were really low. People didn't want to go to emergency, except it was very bad. And then things went, alcohol got more and more available as well, because the bylaws or the provincial regulations changed so that you could order beer with your pizza and get it delivered. So there's some changes that occurred that, you know, who knows what the reason, if there was going to be a change in the up and down, what it would be that caused that. I think COVID now is settled in a way, and we're still seeing lots, but there's still some more stability within the emergency department. We do have a better system now. The small hospitals in Canada tended not to be part of a national emergency room data system. That's why we had to do that manually in the last 2 months. So now we have it in place. So starting April of 2023, there's regular data being collected on the reasons for admission to emergency department. So that'll be much easier to track on a month-by-month basis over the next 2 years or whatever. So that's partly why it was really COVID, and we were planning on doing this on a regular basis. The doctors and the nurses particularly, were really committed to it because they saw the change that was occurring. And anecdotally, the doctors are still saying now that they notice that during the midnight shift particularly, they don't get that cluster sort of between about 2:30 and 4 in the morning. They still notice that. Even though statistically it's in the middle of an afternoon, that the numbers really have went way down. So it's between 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock the numbers have gone down, more so than the midnight one has gone down, which is surprising. Whether that's due to the morning closure or not, I'm not sure. So that's, yeah.
And then just to speak to some of the kind of data pieces that NAS supports with, RCMP, we get a data dump kind of once a year. So the most recent data we have for RCMP is 2021, and we're expecting 2022's data in June this year. And actually we just got from Ministry of Education, they come back to our in-hospital birth questionnaires, but literally we got that kind of a couple of days before this meeting, and there's a whole process that we go through in terms of trying to make sure that we present that data in a way that's accurate. So the data pieces we get from partners, we have really good relationships with those folks, but it's just you may only get an update once a year.
Thank you.
And you said when you were going through the slides, that late night hours have been directly correlated with negative effects of alcohol. What about early or morning hours? Is there anything to support or not that?
I'm going to have to defer to you.
There's Sunday, the whole day of Sunday. In the states started opening on Sunday, different states at different times, and they monitored crime. And there was certainly a major impact of Sunday closures. But a lot of the studies are either late night alone or hours in general with late night and morning. So it's hard to separate out morning by itself. There's no one who just did mornings. Our look at, in the afternoon, there was out of between noon and 6 o'clock, that's the time that the highest number of alcohol-related visits are, which is surprising.
Really?
And it's the highest percentage of visits are alcohol-related in that time. And it was also the one that had the major reduction. It went from 66 down to 39 or something like that. It was quite a major reduction.
In the middle of the day, not at night.
In the middle of the day. And I think when I talk to the docs and nurses about it, people's drinking patterns are different, and sometimes people will drink. They may end up going home and going to bed, and then waking up the next morning and notice they've got a boxer's fracture in their wrist and it's hurting and it's sore. So they go to the emergency department in the middle of the afternoon. So it's hard to justify or hard to really do that without a lot more sort of looking at the specifics of each case.
I have a couple of questions. One was, actually a previous conversation had at a camp meeting. I know that you had touched on it, and I didn't see anything in the slides, but you had talked about in the transition from public to private retail sales in Alberta, there was 2 phases, and at both phases, there was an increase in self-harm and suicide rates in the province when that happened. And I don't recall exactly what the reasonings were. Was it more outlet density? Was it an increase in hours? Both? If you could touch on that briefly.
Yeah, that was done in Alberta, where they had 3 different times where they privatized liquor sales. Started off with, I think it was beer, and then it was wine, and then it's spirits, and everything like that. And each time, they compared Alberta with Ontario, and each time for males, there was an increase in suicide deaths. And each time, and it stayed up. And so the divergence between Ontario, which was gradually going down, and Alberta was going up a few times. And they relating it to privatization, but there's various factors that, could be. Is that because privatization increased hours? Is it because they increased advertising and lowered the price? Is it because their staff were maybe less strict on checking ID? Who knows? But it was related privatization. But yeah, that's a study that was done during those 3 different times that Alberta opened up.
And the other question I have, thank you for that. The other question I had was not so much related to the alcohol side of it, but I'm also looking to see if there's unintended consequences. Have we seen an uptick in cocaine and opiate usage? And I know that you can't release like patient data, but is the same frequent flyer, if you will, of the emergency room now, because they don't have access to the substance that they were normally using other substances, and we're actually seeing a higher increase in other drug or substance related harm because of changes that we've made?
Thinking since 2019 or since the closure of the other.
Like, so when we've made the changes in that same data that we have, whether you can only provide us from like the time that we passed the 19 or 19 till now, I know that the COVID pandemic has certainly put people on the brink of mental health and addiction crises themselves. So that data is going to have its own issues within that. I'm specifically looking at where we're looking right now in that same time frame when we compare apples to apples. Where are we in that? Opiate. Like I saw that there was alcohol-related harm. Opiates was still relatively low on the hospitalization side, but have we seen opiate and cocaine use go up or anything else?
We have throughout the province seen cocaine and opioid use increase, certainly during the pandemic itself. And here is just like that. That Sherbrooke, Quebec, Saskatoon study looked at the number of factors, combined factors, and many times alcohol is combined with opioids and cocaine and others when people end up going to emergency departments to those places. And they often, it could be a result of, for youth between 12 and 16 particularly, I mean, we should be looking at under 16 too here, but we didn't because of the research ethics. So we thought we should do it over 16. But so many of those who came in with cocaine, cannabis, or opioid harms were combined with alcohol, and maybe had been alcohol as the initiating activity that evening.
And the last question, now that I say it out loud, I'm like, I forget what I was going to ask.
I'll just ask one more.
Go ahead, I'll think about it. Go ahead.
I noticed on the survey that was done in 2017, there was 483 area residents that responded and 76%. But it sort of says to close earlier than 3 a.m. was how the survey sounds like it was rolled out. And I just wanted to know how the early hours kind of got thrown in there and how that decision came about.
And unfortunately, that was before my time, so I can't speak to that, to be honest, that specific decision. I know that Carla Frog wanted to be here today and send her apologies. It's our ministry's estimates. So she's still working, but I can find out that answer and get back to you. Yeah. And I just also want to look back.
It was a model from Australia that was called Feed the Children First, trying to leave hours closed earlier in the morning so that hopefully people would spend their money on feeding their children rather than on booze. That's where it came from.
I remembered my question. Only if you're done.
Okay, no,
You're good? You're good?
I'm just trying to help you.
Okay. So the question I had was, you had mentioned some of the data on the decrease in the 12 to 6 in the afternoon. I'm also wondering on the gathering of data, is the detoxing or not having access to alcohol, or the withdrawal, I should say, from alcohol, is that considered one of the alcohol-related harms that would have been triggered in the afternoon? So we're actually seeing less people withdraw because there's less access to, or is that a majority of the calls that you would get in the afternoon?
We weren't able to really look at that data because we just looked at injuries or non-injuries and types of injuries. But if someone came in and were needing help for withdrawal and they went through the emergency department, that would have been calculated in the statistics. So it was more anecdotally, but in terms of from what the docs who've been here for a while, in terms of was there any increase in withdrawal? No, there didn't seem to be from their perspective.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Just got one more. So there's the data looks fantastic. Obviously, there's been some positive changes in the last 5 years. What I'm struggling with though is there were so many different restrictions implemented at the same time. So how do we know which one did the good or did any harm or what have you? So kind of struggling with the 2 hours in the morning. Did it do a lot of good with these numbers, or didn't it, or was it more so the hours at the end of the day? Is there really a way to know that without changing it for a term of a year or whatever, and then reevaluating after?
And for solid evidence in terms of saying what did the morning hour closure do, the closest would be is that association with the almost halving of the visits in the afternoon, or in the afternoon versus early in the morning or in the evening. So that would be the closest we could say, but otherwise it would be hard to suggest that with the data.
And that's still not 100% definitive, as you said earlier, that somebody could have been injured, gone to sleep, wake up in the morning, go out hurt, and then go to the hospital.
Yeah.
So without really changing one item and then reevaluating.
And some of it is also in terms of that number of hours, the total. It would probably be much more effective if those hours are more in the evening, but I don't think that would go over very well. I think the idea of increasing the number of hours in the morning can allow people, maybe if they don't start up or if they go home during a period of time. So it's that total number of hours, maybe the influence on things versus, even though I would suspect, based on the studies about the evening hours would be much more effective, but it is also the total hours. Yeah.
And I guess it's difficult as well to isolate that additional 37 hours that you. So if the plan is to perhaps open when SLGA wasn't open already, then there's that 37 hours. So it
that
would,
factor's going to come into effect too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you're right, it's always very difficult to isolate cause and effect with data, you know. Like.
There's other factors that are happening in PA, I think, and other places with privatization, and that is more competition and lower price of alcohol and sales and advertising of alcohol, all of which
affect things somewhat, but
Other than seeing what happens.
I have less of a question and more of a comment, that I think that it's awesome to see some of the people that may be involved in the vending and the sale and distribution of alcohol in the community attend these meetings as well, because this information is important for everyone. I know that there's some in person, there's some that are joining in. I think it's awesome that we have community businesses that are also invested in the health of the community. And I hope that an engagement process, one of the worries that I had during the privatization is that we don't have that, we had the opportunity to lose the responsibility from the public sale into the private sale. And I hope that the same belief is there from our private vendors to continue to keep the evidence-based approach and understand where councils may sit on trying to make that evidence-based approach going forward. And we hope to keep everyone involved in that process, both stakeholders, community members, and everybody involved in that process as we go through it. And that way people are using the same information and data that we have to justify the reasons that they can also bring into their business models and be able to make that work for their businesses as well. I just wanted to put that out there. I know that it's been a long time coming to get to the meeting where we're at today and the collection of data of where we're at, but I really appreciate everyone taking the time to be at multiple meetings of council, and the amount of data and collection that must go into being ready to bring that to council. So thanks to CAMP and any vendors that are here or potentially involved virtually.
Okay, well, no more questions. Well, thanks very much for coming and presenting to the council. We got kind of a difficult decision ahead of us, I guess, trying to create a balance in the community, trying to accommodate people that are maybe a little bit more responsible, and some that can't take on that responsibility. So thanks again.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd also like to say thank you to the 9 people watching. So,
Thank you, folks.
Okay, a motion to enter the committee as a whole.
I'll move to enter into committee of the whole.
I'll second.
Councilor Lettery, all those in favor? Motion is carried. And now deliberate, I guess, over the request to amend our bylaw number 599. Open the floor for either motion or discussion or both.
Just to clarify, of course, we're in committee, so any motion would just be a recommendation to council.
Okay.
But essentially the purpose of the committee is to have a more open discussion, obviously, which is what council is going to have, but also to provide us with direction. We haven't prepared a bylaw amendment, or we don't know what it would be if we were even going to consider one. So this is your opportunity to have debate and then just give us direction. It's not necessary that any change is going to be implemented today, just to be clear.
Thank you, Lyle.
I would think in order to give a direction, we would probably, before the night's over, would have to have a consensus of some sort to give you that. So that's kind of where I'm going with that.
Yeah, you'd be making a recommendation to council.
Well, my recommendation is that there be no bylaw amendment. And in accordance with the evidence, the research-based evidence that is presented tonight by members of CAMP and the Northern Alcohol Strategy, showing that it has been an effective strategy to reduce alcohol sales consumptions, I would not be in favor of amending the bylaw.
Well, I'm in favor of amending the bylaw. I think that we could give, look at down the road in a year, we could amend that bylaw, open up at 9 o'clock in the morning for a year. If the stats change, they change. If they don't change, then we're good to go. Get some normalization in our community here. Like a couple hours in the morning, see how it goes. If it goes south, change it back. If it doesn't, well,
Abby?
So reading through the comments from that survey,
Something else.
they provide an interesting dichotomy, or many facets of feelings in the community. But I don't necessarily think that this decision, like a lot of comments seem, or number of comments seem to put forward, it's not about a business owner achieving greater profits. And while this business is a handy scapegoat for a lot of people that have very strong feelings about this issue and the harms of alcohol, this business, I have to say, this business has the right to make a request to change the regulations. We as a council, though, have the privilege and the responsibility to consider the request and choose a path forward that we each feel is in the greater public interest. So I'm not really one to make an appeal to tradition, but in this case, having grown up in Ontario, having come of age in Ontario, off-sale and private liquor retail isn't really a thing. I guess with that basis, I feel it's unnecessary to have any retail liquor available outside of like office hours and Saturdays. But that said, I'm not a great consumer of beverage alcohol. I do enjoy a couple on the lake and at social events. From my personal experience, I don't have an issue with planning ahead for like such events. Purchasing my beverages a day or 3 ahead to make sure that I have what I need available. And with the data that's presented, albeit it's a little dated, there are benefits to reducing hours. It has been shown not just with the data, local data, but in other places. So today I won't be supporting any changes to bylaw 599-18, but I do look forward to future information from Northern Alcohol Strategy, CAMP, and our healthcare partners when maybe we'll review the regulations again.
Councillor Clausen?
So I think there's two major issues with this, the bylaw that was put in 2018, and the first one I spoke about a little bit earlier. There were so many different implementations put in, or restrictions implemented, that we really can't gauge which of those did any good, showed any positive results or negative results, however that may look. And I think it's worth entertaining, having a look at the idea of opening up for 2 more hours in the morning, and gauging that after a year and seeing where we're at. I really don't think it's going to affect most of our residents drastically at all, but I do think it will affect other businesses in town, with transient people coming through, tourists going through to different camps or different communities farther north, or just out on our lake, or enjoying a camping setting wherever that may be. Whereas a lot of those people are going to buy, if they know they can't buy alcohol in town, they're going to buy that in Prince Albert or Saskatoon, but then they're also going to stop and buy their groceries and everything else there too. So are we restricting a little bit of our other businesses in town by doing that? I think maybe. Is there a real way to gauge that? Probably not. The second one is, council at the time had committed to review after a year the data and statistics, and that never did happen. So that was 5 years ago, and this is the first time that we've seen a review of that. But again, there were so many different restrictions put in place. How do we know what did any good? I think the only way to prove specifically is to change just one thing and re-gauge after a year.
I would just like to add, we have recommendations from somebody who has a master's in public health, 2 medical doctors, one previously being the public health officer for our region, giving us information and recommendations around the continued harm this may do. And I would say that although I would like to see a business be fruitful and progressive and successful, we need to look at the greater good here, right? Our responsibility is to all citizens, and based on the information presented, I urge you to take that into consideration. Combined, we probably have more than 40 some years of experience and research that has informed the presentation this evening, and I think that's something that we definitely need to look at in a more serious way. Thank you.
I'd like to start off by saying this has been a very heavy one weighing on me. I did not want to take any sides, so I took it as a person going out there and asking questions of all people, whether it's business, youth, those suffering with addictions, those that don't suffer with addictions. We have a huge issue in La Ronge with alcohol. We're picking up children off our high school floors that are intoxicated, right? This could be, increased if we allow this bylaw to be changed. I work in the industry where I deal with people that are suffering with addiction all day long. I see the real big picture of it. To answer your question, Matt, about the decrease in the afternoon, this is only what I've been told. I can't say this is 100% gospel, but they have told me, and these are people that are suffering with addictions, just leave it closed until 11 because they sleep between 6 and 11 o'clock before they get up and they go and get their fix. If it's 9, they'll sleep from 6 to 9 and they'll get up and they'll go out and get their fix. And this has been very hard for me. I can see the big picture on the good that can come of allowing this business owner to open up at 9 o'clock. I can see the intent of his work, but at what cost do I want to profit in this community? And I appreciate your comment about them buying their groceries out of town, but they probably do that anyway because of the price of groceries in the community, honestly. I had other people, well, Ryan, it doesn't open up until 11. Okay, we'll go grocery shopping at 9 o'clock, cruise around until 11 o'clock, and then pick up your alcohol. Some of the young people, they told me it kind of sucks in the morning because they buy their alcohol the night before, planning for the next day.
Wow,
But you want to know what they said? They said it sucks, and they've learned to deal with it, and then they wait until 11 and go out and get their stuff. And they laugh about it, and they said it's all right. They're still saying, keep it closed. So I know where my vote's going to be today. And, that's all I have to say on that.
Jordan?
To be honest with everyone at the council table, for me, going into tonight's meeting and before hearing anything, I would have said probably 70-30 on being able to see some movement on the Sunday in the morning hours. Hearing that there is a decrease in the afternoon, I was expecting to hear that we would have seen a larger decrease in the evening visits, the late night visits, the early morning, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning visits, and hearing that it's a majority in the afternoon. I mean, understanding that data, that's where I was asking the questions based on the withdrawal effects of alcohol and those things, and to see that decrease and not hearing a whole lot of increase in opiates that are not directly related to the other addiction and mental health crises that we're seeing throughout the pandemic, but in the same collection data, I still believe that we need to find a balance between community harm from alcohol and community development and being able to see the opportunity. I have heard from the tourism side that it is tougher to plan a trip and be able to get your alcohol at 11 when a lot of people want to be out fishing earlier in the morning. or go out to their campsites that are north of La Ronge and use the alcohol sale and distributor in La Ronge as their source of alcohol, which is a good business opportunity for people that are trying to get their alcohol in La Ronge for tourism. So to me, finding that balance is going to be a real tough one for me. I can see some movement with myself on the Sunday hours and the stat holidays. If we're looking at any kind of amendment to the morning hours, I wouldn't see a reduction back to where we were. But if we could move an hour, I would probably be okay with that. Personally, I think we do need to find that balance. And one of the things that I'm struggling with is when we hear from Dr. Irvine as well about the harm related to alcohol after privatization, and we see that three-phased approach into Alberta of the increased harm to alcohol, especially self-harm and suicide. To me, this is where I'm struggling with making any changes, is because I want to see what that privatization looks like in our area. Does the profit motive change the responsibility of the vendor? And that's a struggle I have of making any changes right now, because we don't know what tomorrow is going to look like with the privatization of alcohol in the community. So, like I said, I can see some movement for myself. As to what that is, I don't know.
Here in Jordan, I could be willing to move, not to 9 o'clock, right? I could see maybe 10 o'clock, but this would all be trial run, and there would have to be an agreement made with CAMP that they will track all alcohol sales and provide CAMP with that information. And how do we control that?
And that was just on tracking the alcohol sales. We don't have the benefit of that because that is now a private business. We don't have a public liquor vendor here that can give us data on how much alcohol was sold. That's a private business. We have no access to their records. And that was
more so concerned on what those alcohol related
harms are. That's the only stat that we can track now. We can't track when people are buying alcohol anymore because of the privatization. So it makes it harder to get that evidence-based approach strictly on the sales of alcohol, unless we have business owners and vendors that are willing to share that information, which is their prerogative to do so. Nothing that we can go after.
Councillor Bashar?
Councillor Clausen, I just wanted to clarify with you, you mentioned that there was a whole suite of interventions implemented at once. What were the interventions besides the hours change?
There was multiple different ones. You'd have to go through that whole bylaw to.
There's 49 passed.
Pardon me?
Was it 49 that were passed?
There was quite a few. And
a lot of signage, a lot of
some of them were
taxes must be
super
open
minor.
as long as yeah.
Some of them were very minor changes. The biggest ones were the hours.
Yeah.
No last call.
Yeah, that
Lots
kind of
of
stuff.
I think it's a 3-page bylaw.
Yeah. Now, what I'm curious why maybe we, as an alternative to changing hours, see how it goes, why don't we conduct, because if the concern is access to alcohol related to tourism, why not conduct and fund a proper tourism survey or study to ask where tourists buy their alcohol and other goods, one, to establish a baseline, and two, to ensure that we don't contribute to further harms or increase the harms that we may have lessened. So, if we're going to make decisions based on these intersections that we're perceiving between alcohol and tourism dollars, let's do it proper. Let's actually get a baseline of what it is now under these hours and ask tourists, are you going to buy your alcohol here if it's available? Because I think if we're going to use evidence-based data, there's nothing wrong with getting better data. And we need to do tourism studies anyway, so.
We did a survey on this whole thing and got 260 responses. I'm not sure we get anything more than that.
No, that's a self-selection survey. I'm talking about a proper tourism study to actually invest money in. We say we're a tourist town. This is kind of an unrelated thing, but if we're going to do this, this is an opportunity to really invest in the data available and be able to act on that.
Councilor Berry?
Another one of my biggest worries, if we go ahead and do make some amendments, to allow for some time to collect data to review, you know, this could be forgotten about again within the next council, whoever comes back in, right? Cause like Councillor Clausen said, it was supposed to be reviewed and then was actually forgotten about over time. That being said too, you know, the other thing, you know, I appreciate Councillor Bashara, what you're saying about, you know, talking to the tourists and that. I think, you know, now that it's gone privatized, because different alcohol establishments can set their prices to whatever they want, right? So if they can get it cheaper down south, who's to say they're not gonna buy it down south? That's always been the case for La Ronge residents. Even our own members in the community go shopping down at Costco and Walmart and all that to save money, right? So it's I don't know. It's a real tough one, and like I said, you know, at what part do we sell our soul? You know, at what detriment to the community, right?
For myself, I'm kind of with Jordan on this. We need to strike a compromise or a balance between what's being asked for, and obviously it's not going to fly as proposed. You know, based on the comments that are on the table, you know, what would that be? You know, would it be just leaving Sunday hours as is? Would it be not going with the 2 hour, maybe a part of that? What would it take to, and then just do it for a year and revisit it and see if that impacts?
If we did it for a year, we'd all still be here.
And then it would be one change and you would actually know if it did any harm or any benefit.
Do we wanna risk the harm?
Well, that's the whole thing I'm having issues with, right?
Like I'm 200% in favor of the late hours that have been cut. You know, I'm not going to even, you know, I think those made an impact, but we really don't know what the impact of the early hours are. But if, you know, if we want to go partway there or whatever, I think.
I don't know if the late hours really had the impact that it could have, and nobody's talked about this, like the bootleggers, and a lot of the people I know, they have bootleggers during the night, but they do not go to the bootleggers at 6 o'clock in the morning. That's when they choose to sleep. They're not going to go to the bootlegger when the store is going to open up in 5 hours at 11. This is what's been said to me.
So then even better for them to get up and go at 9 to the store rather than spend triple the money from a bootlegger, and then they have a little bit left to feed their kids.
I wouldn't say it's better, but the
You
police should be
can skew it every which way you want.
More than likely, whatever the hours are, it's not going to change the total consumption. There's only X number of dollars that are out there, and you know, I guess the other thing is, you know, what are the alternatives? What are the worst alternatives out there to get a fix or whatever, you know? And then the last thing we want is to see an increase in meth and those kinds of things. You know?
Keep in mind too, there are a few of these businesses in town, and all of the small businesses in this community or in any small community are the ones that are supporting all of your hockey teams and your music programs and your art program. It's all of the small, like there's only 3 liquor retailers, but small business as a whole is really what supports a community. It really is.
Okay, so
I guess we, I don't know if we, what point we kind of give a.
Well, I just went back to the report, and it was more to guide the discussion. If you look at the key questions at the bottom, I think it's pretty clear there is an appetite to remove the bylaw, obviously. So the next question is really, there's mixed discussion around changing the hours. We need someone to put forward a motion recommending to council something, or some sort of a straw poll. Just to give us direction as to whether we're preparing a bylaw amendment, and then obviously nothing would change tonight, but something to vote on officially, or if there's not enough will to consider an amendment, then we won't prepare one. So you could start by just asking around the Monday to Saturday hours separately, and then do Sundays and stats, or
Yeah.
do them together. Someone would have to put forward a recommendation, and then either have a friendly amendment or see if it gets support or not. So the procedure for this would be, you would make a motion recommending to council that we consider a bylaw amendment to amend the hours to X.
Once
And
we're,
if that motion passes, then that would be direction to council, which is also direction to me, to prepare a bylaw amendment for your voting on at a future meeting.
once we're out of committee.
Once you can make that motion to recommend to council in committee. That's,
I'll
but you
move-
can't make a motion as a council.
I'll move to recommend to council to amend bylaw 599/18 to allow retail liquor business operation from 10 a.m. till 11 p.m. Every day of the week.
Every day?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we'll go around the table and see if there's enough support for that.
That's 1 hour.
No, I'm just, the motion to recommend. I thought there cannot be a motion, period. There would be a
No,
motion
I
to
just-
rise and report, and then that would be a motion, right?
Well, what happens when you rise and report is you consider any recommendations from the
Okay.
committee.
I
So
had to
this
put
would be a
something- we had to
formal
get-
recommendation.
Yeah, we had to get something on the floor and see if we get a consensus.
It's a recommendation, not a motion.
Yeah.
And then once it's actually
administration would
typed-
have to amend, do a or a draft bylaw amendment that we would officially vote on
We'd have-
at
yeah.
another meeting.
We can't change the bylaw tonight, but we can.
Correct.
Yeah.
And if this was a non-bylaw issue,
Okay.
then what would happen is you'd come out of committee and you would vote to accept that recommendation or not, which seems a little redundant, but that's the process.
So there's discussion on the motion?
Okay, we
Straw
see
poll?
those two aren't supportive because the way we said a motion in the second here. Vivian, any?
No, I'm not. I'm not willing to undo the work
Yeah.
that groups of people, Northern Alcohol Strategy and the Community Alcohol Management Plan have conducted for the past, I think it's like 6 or 7 years, backed by evidence-based research. I think that what our current bylaw as it stands is appropriate. I don't see the need for the availability of alcohol and cannabis, might I add, because this bylaw applies to both, for additional hours. So I would say no, I'm not in favor.
Councilor Bedry?
At this point in time, no, it's too risky. So no.
I'm opposed to change.
Supposed to change?
Your worship, you can call the question, it is a motion that people can vote as you would normally vote.
Jordan?
You wanna see me talk out of both sides of my face? Is that what you're looking at me for?
Yeah.
I would speak both in favor and in opposition to it. Like I said, I'm very torn on this. On the opposition side, I say that we're at a situation right now where we have one change already that is going to be implemented, and that is the privatization of public liquor sales and what that will mean for community alcohol related harm. The other side, where I'm speaking in favor of changing it, is that I think that we have went, as the pendulum swings, too far, in my personal belief, on the restriction of alcohol, specifically on the Sunday and the stat holiday. I think that one can for sure move back to at least the 11 to 11 that we currently have, or we can move that 1 hour in the morning. Any which way, I don't think there's going to be a huge difference between the 10 and the 11 a.m. But that Sunday and stat, I think, will make a bit of a difference when it comes to the economic impact that we have in the community of people being able to access their alcohol in the community if they're camping or going out in the lake on those long weekends, which typically when you're going north, it's going to be for the long weekend, right? And if it's going to push people away to places like Waskesiu or other jurisdictions where there might be access to that alcohol earlier, we might see the economic impact of that. So like I said, I talked out of both sides of my face. When it comes down to the vote, I guess I'm going to have to put up half an arm. I don't know what's going to happen with this.
Okay, can I ask a question of council? Is that okay at the moment? Who here, when you go and plan a trip, I'm just asking kind of the common experience at the table. I know that we are not necessarily folks that experience direct harms from the hours changes. But in my experience, I plan ahead and I plan down to the purchase of alcohol, the purchase of food, and those kinds of things. I know where I'm going to get them and when. Is this really is this 1 hour change going to affect somebody driving 4 or 5 hours from 4 or 5 hours away? Are they not going to load the booze in their car on their way? Are they really going to stop here for the long weekend to grab some? Maybe if they forgot a little bit, sure, they're going to spend a little, maybe, up here. But they're going to fill up their car with gas. And if they're moving to a different destination, how much are we actually going to capture when it comes to changing that 1 hour in relation to the potential harm of increasing access to those within our community, the community members that we have here? How does that weigh out? Just because, like, in my own experience, that's where I go from a lot of these things, my own experience, and I have a unique experience to some people at this table where I come from the land of, the government taking all the profits from liquor sales, and heavily regulating and unionized workers, so they work office hours, and stats you're closed, Sundays you're closed, you're not gonna, if you didn't get your stuff on Saturday, by 5 o'clock, you're SOL for the weekend.
I think that's why you got the wide range of hours, because people live different lives and everybody makes their decision based on whatever. And so, I think 10 o'clock is a fair compromise based on what was, what was being, we were asked to change.
But Mayor, if I may, like alcohol and cannabis, because this bylaw, like I said, applies to both, not just alcohol, is not allowed in provincial parks. You shouldn't be consuming either of them if you're driving a boat, because it's dangerous, or if you're swimming. So, if we're promoting community safety and well-being, by allowing people to have access to something.
It's absolutely not allowed in provincial parks. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
You can't consume in a camper
Cottage.
on a long weekend.
You can in a cottage or in a camp, but you
Not in a
can't in a
provincial
camper.
park.
Okay. But so, why are we enabling, right? Why are we allowing for the enabling of a controlled substance at the end of the day? What precedent are we setting? Where we're role models here. And I feel for the business who, yes, they will probably lose sales, and I know that they want to contribute back. And I think that they are lovely people, but we have to look at the big picture. Like, alcohol causes harm. It has caused historical harm in this community and the region. Do we want to enable that? And there's research, evidence, a presentation from people who it's their full-time job to do this and do the research and find the evidence. So really, what do we actually want? That's why I can't stand with that. Go ahead, Ryan.
Okay, last comment.
Yeah.
We
Like if we left things the way they are, like the new business could stay open till 11 o'clock, right? And because the old liquor store used to close at 7 or whatever it was. So I don't know, in the year, if we see more incidents happening during the night increase, we'll automatically see the effect of keeping that store open later, right? And sure enough, if we have it open earlier, it's still going to be the same thing, right? Because alcohol is alcohol.
Keep in mind too, liquor wasn't just privatized. We've had two private retailers in town for multiple years.
Absolutely, yeah. No, you're 100% correct on that. And that's the other hard part is like SLGA used to be able to give us the numbers, and now they can't give us that because they don't sell the alcohol to the distributors anymore. That's all. They can buy straight from the wholesaler, right?
They'll still know how much is coming through this community though, because they're collecting tax on it.
Okay, well, we'll close the debate on that for now. We'll move on to property tax primer.
We have to call the question.
Direct call
There's a
question
motion
for
on the
direction.
floor.
You want to do it now? Okay. Who wants to start? Wow.
If the
Well,
motion
motion's
is
on the
defeated,
floor already.
someone else can present another motion, or you can move forward with the agenda.
So,
Okay.
we're calling the question.
Motion
One
was
question.
made, seconded.
And we're not done
Second.
voting.
And it was to
10 a.m. to 11 p.m.
10 to
7 days a week?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a motion on the floor, call the question?
Okay, the question, the motion on the floor, or the recommendation is to move to 10 o'clock AM to 11 PM, 7 days a week. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? 3 opposed. Motion carried.
Administration will prepare a bylaw amendment for your consideration and vote at the next meeting.
Okay, we'll move to property primer, 6.3. Do you wanna, Trevor, did you wanna lead that, or?
Yeah, well, basically this stems off of last year. There was a bit of a discussion, but it was a little bit late into the year for us to make any changes to the tax formula. Of some companies or some property owners paying dual base taxes. So basically, like, I went through and I did like a whole study on the process just to see how it affected things when it was initially brought in. Because basically there was a set rate, and then once the base tax was brought in, it didn't actually change the revenue at all, but what it did was it changed who was paying all the revenue. And basically what we found out is that a lot of the lower valued properties ended up paying more, which I guess was the intent of it all along, was to basically give people an incentive not just to sit on any empty land, to build on it and do something with it. But we also found that like a lot of the higher end businesses, higher valued properties came down in cost for revenue.
That was the exact intent of
Yeah,
putting that in, was so that people with empty properties would do something with them.
right. So, I mean, there was a discussion where people were, there was the discussion where it was mentioned that, you know, why should I be paying 2 base taxes on mixed property? And I guess the base tax isn't really, it's more or less a tool to even out the taxes and not have such a big discrepancy between the low end and the high end of the taxes. Exactly for that purpose, to ensure that.
So within the tax tools of a municipality, there is the ability to tax or have a base tax differentiated between the land and the improvements on that land, is there not?
That's correct, yeah.
So if you had a higher base tax on the land that you have rather than the improvements on that land, that would also be an incentive to build, right? So
For vacant land, yeah.
for vacant land. So
No, the base tax would have to be on the improvement to give the incentive to.
Yeah, like the analysis that we
Yeah.
wanted to do was essentially to show you that the application of 2 base taxes was just a methodology for calculation. It didn't cause an adverse impact to those landowners. And in fact, if we look back to 2009 to today, if you had mixed use of a certain value, your taxes actually might be less today. So that's just the way you calculate each portion of those mixed use property taxes. And yes, there is a land improvement portion of the base tax today. There wasn't when it was first brought in, but there is today.
Yeah.
So if you had a property that was, if you had a base property, it'd be the same whether it was on a vacant lot or whether it had improvements on it.
Well, the mixed use discussion is obviously only to a piece of property that has mixed uses on it. The vacant land is vacant land, so it would be either commercial or residential, depending on zoning and whatnot. So it would follow, if you had vacant land in residential zone and it was the base tax for land was $600, then that's the lowest you can pay in taxes. But it would be 600 plus the other calculation that is involved.
And when it was brought in, that was exactly what it was, to deal with those vacant properties, and then it was kind of brought in to kind of even things out, but it just kind of got a little bit.
So it basically, the different amounts we found that was $39,152 was the commercial sort of equilibrium rate, where anything above that ended up paying a little bit less on their base tax. Anything with the addition of the base tax, anything below that ended up paying a little bit more. For residential, the residential portion, the amount was $30,006. So again, anything below that would have ended up paying a little bit more. Anything above ended up paying less. With that being said, like if we were looking at a couple different options, the best options that I found is number one, either just doing, if we were going to be just going to one base tax for the mixed use properties, to either just increase the commercial base tax for everyone across the board, and that would sort of even out the loss in revenue from the dual base taxes. So what that would do is, if we wanted to put it up to that, it's $775 right now for the base tax, but to get back the lost revenue from those 38 properties that are mixed use, it would have to go up to about 950 between both the land and the improvements. Alternatively, if we wanted to spread it out amongst the entire town, including both residential and commercial, it would be about a $30 increase across the board for everyone. So those are probably, if we were looking at getting rid of the dual base taxes for the mixed use, those are probably the fairest ways to look at that. I still think, based on the way that it was done initially from 2008 to 2009, personally, there wasn't actually anyone that was charged a whole lot more, so I would say just to leave it as such. The other thing is that I actually went and called up a few other communities that have a base tax, and there's not a lot because it's not really used a lot amongst a lot of other communities. The two that I found were both Air Ronge and Wadena, Saskatchewan, and they both have the dual base taxes on their mixed use properties, just like us.
And my apologies, I just noted as I clicked in here that the request for direction has the wrong
I just re-uploaded it.
document. So yeah, you can take a look at that on your own. It kind of summarizes and talks in a little bit more detail about some of these issues, but it talks about tax tools and how they work. One of the big challenges, of course, is when you're going year to year and you don't change the tax tools and you're just either increasing taxes or decreasing taxes. The real only variable for us, because we haven't increased the tax rate, is if your assessment went up, and so that would increase your taxes. When you change the way you're going to apply tax tools, like a base tax or a minimum tax or things like that, it's always going to hit a few people in an adverse or very beneficial way, because it's hard to make that apply in a way that will impact everyone the same. That's not the way they work. But it talks about the mill rate factor, the base tax, and the minimum tax. Those are essentially the three major tax tools that you can use to redistribute how you collect taxes. So there's nothing required of you today. If you want to read through the document, unless there's a direction from council to look at changing the way we calculate taxes, we will simply proceed as though we would have last year.
I guess at the end of the day, it's all about fairness, you know, based on values and distributing that.
You hit the nail on the head. Like the key word is it's a value-based decision by councils. Like you could take your entire tax revenue that you want to derive, divide it by the number of properties in town equally, and collect the same amount from everyone. You can distribute taxes any way you want. So when you use the ad valorem method, which is based on property values, you're saying those that have a greater ability to pay, or those that have properties that generate more revenue potentially, should pay more. That's a value-based statement. If you say, we think that everyone benefits equally from policing services and there's a cost to that, so we want to make sure base taxes are at least at a certain level, that's a value-based statement. There's nothing right or wrong. It's really up to council on on how they like to approach the collection of taxes.
Yes. Any comments and questions?
That was another reason for putting it the way that it was so that there was a few properties around town that were paying an exponential amount for their taxes, so theirs came down a little bit by doing this, and then multiple other ones went up very minimally. And the thought around the table at the time was that a person shouldn't be penalized because they've invested extra into their home to making our community better and nicer and everything else. Whereas the next guy, maybe he's got all his money in a bank account and has a very tiny little home, but then the neighbor is being penalized because they built a big home and have nothing in the bank.
Yes, the only other option from having the base tax would be, to deal with the vacant properties or less developed, would be to have your minimum tax and then basically everybody taxed based on your value of your assessment as opposed to having that base on there. I don't know how that would look.
If we took a minimum tax that looked at things like specific line items in our budget where we talk about the cost of good administration, that is something that everyone benefits equally from in the municipality. We have a lot of free services, the library, fire services in our community. Those things can all be roped into a minimum tax. And the other thing is that if you talked about frontage alone, when we talk about street clearing and like those things, those are going to be valued based on how big your yard is as well. Like if someone is clearing the 30 feet in front of my house and then clearing the 200 feet in front of somebody else's, that's a more value for service that you're actually getting in front of that area. So if there can be something along the lines of frontages on how that is assessed. And the other thing is using the base tax to, I guess, settle the score a little bit, that if we see some exorbitantly high rates, that we can use the base tax as the tool to keep that fair within the community. Another thing that I would bring to the table is that for a lot of the high value properties that we have, especially in the commercial side, is you have the ability to write off part of that as your business expense. Whereas the average residential person, whether you're taking $50 from them or $100 or $300, that's something that they, on average, cannot write off as part of their day-to-day operation.
Businesses pay a higher rate of tax though too.
What's that?
Businesses already pay a higher rate of tax.
In what way?
The mill rate factor is 1.5
Right.
or whatever.
Right, like cost per thousand, right?
So if your residential house is paying $1,000 in tax, the same value commercial property is paying $1,500 or something like that, right?
Right. So the cost per thousand, like on the ad valorem side,
exactly.
right? So I get that, and that's where I'm saying that we use the base tax more of a place to level the playing field with the minimum tax is things that everyone benefits from equally. The Uniplex, the library, everyone uses those things for free on a lot of cases, right?
I understand 100% what you're saying. That it doesn't quite calculate out that way with minimum tax because minimum tax only triggers if your taxes would have been under that threshold. So if you said, let's use an example. Let's say you said every property in town derives $1,000 of benefit, and so the minimum tax is $1,000. No one's going to pay less than that. So, but there would still be people that would pay $1,000, and then those that would be paying proportionately more, even though they may be getting the same services. So, unless you said all of the services the town offers are equally of value to everyone, and you just split it up evenly, you could do that. But if you wanted to do what you're suggesting, we probably would have to sit down with council, and you'd have to advise us which services in the budget you felt should be equally spread out and which ones shouldn't. Whether it's transportation,
Right.
recreation, tourism, libraries, community services, all those things, general government.
And there was a change made by the province 3-4 years ago, I want to say, where they changed the percentage of the assessed value. Was that something like you have your assessed value, 70% of which is used for tax purposes, they changed that to 80? Would that net benefit the higher income or the higher assessed value properties or the lower assessed value?
Because part of the tax calculation always includes assessment, it's always going to be more punitive to those with higher value properties. So if they increase that percentage, obviously 10% more on 500,000 is more than 10% on 100,000.
But if you go with the underlying system, which is a value of property, really the base tax actually skews that value that's given to us.
Yeah, like it's
Whereas
not,
the
there's
minimum
no
doesn't-
perfect way, like even with minimum tax, if you said, well, these services over here are $1,000, so everyone's gotta pay at least 1,000.
Right.
But if I only have to pay 1,000, I'm not paying a percentage of the other services that you say I'm deriving less benefit from, but should be contributing to. So you're still capping it in a way that is difficult, and most councils kind of struggle with those same questions. Usually, base taxes and tools, to Councillor Clausen's point, is they're implemented to spur, to prevent people from like speculating and buying up land and then just sitting on it because it costs them nothing in taxes, or virtually nothing in taxes. So they'll introduce a base tax on the land of commercial and or residential property because they want to see people do things with that land. That's usually why it's used, and it also brings up the low. So if you are in like a lot of rural places in Saskatchewan where there's a lot of maybe very old houses, like 100-year-old houses versus brand new houses, and maybe they're only selling for $25,000, well that's a lot different than $350,000. And so they bring that base tax in as another method to, or a minimum tax, to bring them up and make sure they're at least paying X amount.
So what's the most common, like if you, maybe you could do a survey, which is the most common tool? Is it the minimum tax or is it the base tax?
It does vary because the Cities Act gives different powers to the cities to create different classifications. So if a city wanted to address the issue of vacant land tax rates, they would create a classification called vacant land, and it would be separate. And you don't have the same powers as an urban, small urban center. So it wouldn't be 100%, but if we looked at just those that were under the same rules as you are,
Yeah.
the typical approach would be the ad valorem, and it would be based on assessment. And if they wanted to introduce base tax, they could. I know I was in Young, Saskatchewan, they had a base tax. I think they also have a minimum tax. We don't have a minimum tax.
The vacant land thing really isn't a big deal here because we don't have any, there's very few properties that are vacant right now
And that's,
that are privately owned, and
exactly.
even very few that the municipality owns to sale, so.
So you're using it more to bring up those lower valued homes versus the higher valued homes, which makes sense.
So there's nothing to stop a minimum tax being the base tax as well.
A base tax is the base plus your calculation for the assessment portion.
Right.
Whereas minimum tax is, we're gonna do this calculation over here, and if it's $1,200 and the minimum tax is $1,000, you don't pay any extra.
Right.
But if your calculation's 800, obviously you get bumped up to 1,000,
Right.
and that's it.
So it's not, one on top of the other.
Right.
It's either
Whereas base tax is one on top of the other.
It's your assessment plus this extra charge.
I'm just thinking for the sole specific reason of a vacant property, if there was a minimum tax, that would be the deterrent from a vacant property, right? Because if it's not gonna trigger, if I pay $3,000 at my house, the minimum tax makes no difference to me unless the minimum tax is $3,500, right? So to me, if you had a vacant property that was paying $300, you could set the minimum tax at $1,000, and if it hasn't triggered 1,000, then it's getting that settles the issue of a vacant property.
What is our base, 675, and we don't have a lot of vacant property anyway.
But that's what I'm saying though, right?
670.
675 for residential, 775 for commercial.
If we're justifying an increase in the base so that we have people that are sitting on vacant properties, and that's the only reason why we've increased the base and shifted the tax burden from the higher assessed properties to lower assessed.
It also does that though, exactly, brings down from the higher and up on the lower.
But I'm saying if that was the only intent of raising the base tax was to push people to develop, we can do the same thing with the minimum tax, lower our base so we can shift that again from the people that are obviously not necessarily, but statistically I would say that the lower assessed properties are gonna have a net benefit or a higher benefit to their day-to-day and their month-to-month finances than the people that have the higher end assessed properties. And that's why I'm saying that if we can lower the base, put in a minimum tax, and that way it achieves the same value of you must develop, then I would see that as a better approach personally to challenging the vacant property issue, which we don't have.
Right.
But if there was a vacant
I
property
think it's
issue,
a moot point because you wouldn't be, like you said, because of that, you wouldn't be deriving a lot of change. And you could say, like if you, for the same rationale on either side, you could say, look, we think that everyone should be paying at least $1,000 in taxes. You could make the base tax such that that's going to happen. Like, so you can use both tools to achieve similar things. But because we are the largest landowner in the municipality of vacant land, it's not really an issue for taxpayers.
So I guess, this conversation is probably not gonna implement change for this year, maybe that's a discussion for.
Probably not, but we wanted to give you the report, and if there was a strong feeling, we could prepare something now, but it's also something that we could come back during a quieter time of the year and say, if we were gonna look at this, like we could take a little more of a look at if you change base tax in this manner, what would happen to a taxpayer who has a house of this value, just to give you a sense. But I'm also not hearing that, our doors aren't being banged down by the public saying our tax system's unfair. I think the only real comment we might get occasionally is we have the mill rate factor for commercial and commercial pays more. That's a decision of council as well. If you lowered the mill rate factor for commercial, you've got to increase taxes to all the residential.
Okay, is there an appetite to make any changes in terms of what's been recommended, I guess? Is not,
Not for me.
okay, so leave it, and we'll move on to White Community Housing Shelter Strategy, I guess.
is this just receive and file? Do we have someone here to provide an update, or?
Just a written update.
We've heard that following the point in time survey happening tomorrow and the survey that's out there right now for the 28th of this month, they will be compiling that data and willing to share something in person with council following that.
So end of May?
I don't have a date,
Okay.
but I can request for them to, or invite them to come at the next meeting, and hopefully we can get a date sometime soon.
Teresa would have came tonight, but she's on holidays this week.
I'll move to rise and report then.
Okay, seconder. Councilor Henry, in favor? Okay, motion carried. Okay, do we have to formalize that motion, or?
Because this requires a bylaw to implement, you won't have to accept the recommendation because you'll be voting on the bylaw, we'll prepare the bylaw. If this was something like a policy change or something like that, then I'd ask you to vote on accepting the recommendation or not.
Okay,
But I think because you have the recommendation, you're gonna get to vote on whether you agree with it or not when the bylaw amendment comes forward.
And there's 3 readings,
Correct.
and they can be amended at any one of those 3.
Okay, we'll move to bylaws. We have the third reading of the animal control bylaw. There was a couple of small changes I think you made.
So the question came up when we were doing the readings the last time around exotic animals, poisonous, some of the animals that were prohibited in the draft of the bylaw, as to whether there was some knowledge that there may be owners of some of those animals in the community. So we looked into what your options are for moving forward. Obviously, you can continue on as the bylaw is written and prohibit those animals. Those wild and exotic animals are controlled through provincial legislation, and there is a permitting process that's required. So you could also just choose to be silent, and that's an option to remove all references to it in the bylaw and just let the province deal with that. Or you could say a hybrid would be to say you keep it in there, but you need permission of council, which would, part of that would probably be validating that they have their permits and such in place. Again, it's not gonna prevent someone who, unbeknownst to administration, owns these animals, and we're not going in their homes to enforce anything, unless there was a complaint of some kind, or an animal gets loose, which is probably the reason why some municipalities ban them altogether, is the concern about wild exotic animals getting out in the community. We know that dogs and cats do. It is possible for animals to get out, unfortunately, depending on their owner, and other things that can happen, like natural disasters and things that we can't control. So those are the options before you, and we just we're proposing that the reading as is, but we certainly have no objection to any of the three options, so it's up to council.
Question for administration. If we speak in the bylaw on wild or exotic animals, we are therefore bound to enforcement should there be a complaint. Correct?
We are able to enforce, yes. It's
We're not
no different than,
obligated
like,
if it's in our bylaw?
well, like unsightly premise or any other bylaw provision, a lot of the enforcement the town does is complaint driven. Yes, if we see something, we're gonna probably say something to
Right.
the owner and try and get compliance, but it doesn't mean we're going to knock door to door and
So,
verify and enforce stringently or any of those things.
The kind of direction I'm going with this is if we don't have an interest in our staff having to act on a complaint about a wild or exotic animal, and we don't necessarily provide the training to be able to handle said animals, perhaps we should remain silent on that?
Yeah, we wouldn't, just to clarify, so the intent of, if you leave the bylaw as is to preclude that in the bylaw, what you're saying to the community is that it's not permitted in the community. It's less about the bylaw enforcement. Now, would we have to have someone come in and assist with the enforcement activities if there was a complaint and it was true and someone had one? Sure, we may have to do that, but it's more that you would be saying, look, we don't want these animals in here because if they do get loose or if there is an issue, it's caused problems. Alternatively, I would say, if you have no issue with them being in the community as long as they are permitted by the province through their processes, then just be silent altogether to the issue, because then we don't have to enforce anything. If there's a complaint, we pick up the phone to the province and say, is this a permitted animal? Yes. And if it's not escaped or at large or any of those kinds of issues, we would not have anything to enforce. So those are probably those are the two diverse options. Now the third in the middle is, if you want to be made aware of when someone brings an exotic animal into your community and say, okay, we're okay with that one, and no, we're not okay with this kind of exotic animal here on a case by case, then you do the hybrid option.
Yeah, I think if it comes to our attention, there's an issue with a wild or exotic animal, it doesn't make it go away. So, you have to have something in place to deal with it, and probably dealing with it the same way as we do chickens, you gotta have a permit. And so, if it comes to our attention, there's a complaint, the animal's not permitted, at least you gotta say, well, you're not in compliance with the bylaw.
One of the things that came up at SUMA, ironically, around the animal control is not necessarily what do you do to allow chickens, but what do you do when someone surrenders said chickens. The animal control is not necessarily what you do while you have it, but also what you do when you don't want it. So if the person just opens up their fence and says, here, I don't want chickens anymore, and lets them run wild in the community, now that becomes our issue on how do we handle that, right? So to me, if we're having conversations about the...
We could deal with this one KFC.
So don't disagree. But the other thing is like, to me, if we're looking specifically on the language around the wild and exotic animals, like if someone has a pet monkey, what are we gonna do when they don't want the pet monkey anymore? Like we can't have that swinging from trees for 6 months of the year either, right? So like to me, it's easier to go on the side of upon permission of council, so that we know what can happen if there if that person surrenders that animal or lets it run wild, what is that? What can that happen in the community? Like, don't get me wrong, a chameleon or a Komodo dragon is not a huge risk to the community, but if someone wants to keep something wild and exotic, that could create some level of harm in the community. Should it get loose or should it be surrendered?
Or just fall back to the provincial guidelines that are already in place.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the thing is
Keep
I
it
almost,
simple.
oh sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just like the option to remain silent on it, I think is maybe better just to allow things to defer. We do have resources in this community, for the existing potential wild and exotic, species that might exist here, who have actually offered to be a resource to our staff if they need to be. So, I don't know, I'd be fine with moving ahead, making a motion to do third reading as is, as presented.
I'll second.
So just, sorry, just to clarify, so
Okay, motion to, for
the
third
bylaw
reading.
as it's written prohibits animals, exotic animals,
Oh.
period. So if you would like to be silent to the issue, I would,
Yes.
the motion would be to approve third reading with the following amendment: the deletion of wild or exotic animal definition, the deletion and renumbering of section 7.1, and deletion of appendix A, and the reordering of appendices, which is the
Option
under number 2 in there. I know
Yes,
it's,
correct.
I
Sorry,
didn't do
yeah.
as good a job of presenting this as I should have, but if you follow that line.
To proceed with option 2, as recommended by administration, would be to defer to provincial legislation.
Yeah, or you can just give me that direction, I'll amend the bylaw and bring it back next meeting, which is probably the easiest for you.
Okay.
Well, isn't
But
it
if
ready
you wanna
to go?
resolve it today.
Isn't it
that's
ready
fine.
to go?
I
Except,
think
and we
so.
all
Yeah.
need to
Option
delete.
2. Option 2.
Okay, option 2, that's the motion,
Second.
yeah.
Great.
All in
Call
favor?
the question? Motion's carried.
Thank you.
Do we like making things more difficult than they have to be? Maybe.
So this is coming back or no?
No.
Good, there we go.
Good.
Got it done.
Okay, we'll move to,
Oh my gosh, this agenda.
I'll
Who
move
put this
to
together?
approve leave policy 1006-2, replacing leave policy 1006-01.
Is that your
Second.
motion? Yes? Okay.
I'll second.
That makes sense.
okay, the RE policy, that was
Discussion, question?
already approved, okay, so we'll move on to the hiring
Call the
policy.
question.
You gotta call the question, Mayor.
Call the
There was a
question. All in
motion on the
favor?
floor.
The motion's on the table. It was
There was
seconded.
a mover and a seconder, we need to call the
Okay,
question.
call the
Yeah.
question then. Okay, all in favor? Okay, motion carried. I was finding,
I jumped ahead on
find
this
it in
one.
my agenda here.
It's
Okay,
getting late.
8.2.
okay, request for a decision on the hiring policy. That's interesting enough because I guess we have some changes and we have to, how do we deal with the newcomers and are the requirement was there and do we continue on, make sure that, that we have opportunity for both new staff and council to participate
Just
in that.
clarifying that that was the intent, I assume it was, but we didn't wanna over.
Councillor Heather?
I do appreciate bringing this policy forward, and I would be in favor of, new staff and new council, when they come in onboarded, that they would have to take the truth and reconciliation training.
Yeah.
I,
I'd like to make a motion on that, or is that your motion? Are you making a motion?
I was just having a
You're
comment.
just talking? Okay.
Okay, I'll move to proceed with option A to approve
Okay.
hiring policy 1005-02, replacing hiring policy 1005.
Second.
all in favor of the motion?
Yeah.
Okay, motion carried. It's a good, initiative.
Absolutely.
I really,
It is.
really, it was an eye opener for me. I thought I lived in the community and I had lots of friends, employees, wife that's Indigenous, but I'll tell you, there was other things that were really important to know, and so it was very helpful.
Is there not one being offered online right now?
That's the one.
That's the one?
That's the same.
Am I too late?
No,
No,
it's anytime it's
Oh,
ongoing
okay.
You
intake.
received a link for that, Councillor Hunt, and then
I'll help
we
you,
can
you'll help me tomorrow.
discuss.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, we'll move to 8.3, and that's the budget amendment. I think that's just
So there was a number of minor changes and ups and downs. One of the biggest changes was the municipal revenue sharing. So this is just an amendment before we get to preparing the tax bylaws. Nothing but good news overall that we found another $200,000 to move towards reserves. So it's all good.
that's it.
Fantastic. I'd like to move to approve the 2023 operating budget as amended by administration.
I'll second.
Councilor Vedri, all those in favor? Motion's carried. It's a good problem to have. Okay, we'll move to 8.4, that's the business, home-based business for 123 Hastings Street.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is an application for a development permit for a discretionary use related to a home-based business for a tattoo service that is proposed to be provided in the apartments at 1503 Bedford Drive.
No, you're one ahead of me.
You're one ahead of me.
Yeah.
123 Hastings.
Ice cream shop.
Ice cream.
Too many reports, got them all mixed up.
My mistake, your fault.
123 Hastings. That's up front.
Let me back that up just a little bit.
Thanks to you, Abby.
Once again, this is a development permit application for a home-based business for a discretionary use related to a retail store to be located at 123 Hastings Street. The application relates to use of a small area of the applicant's garage on that residentially zoned property for the purposes of selling ice cream and other treats through limited hours during the summer months. And I reviewed in detail the regulations of the home-based business requirements associated with the zoning bylaw with the applicant, who appears to meet all the requirements and is well familiar with them. I've also let her know that as part of our consultation process for these types of applications, we do various types of reaching out by sending letters of notification and having her put a sign on the property, and she's assured me she's talked to a lot of the neighbors, but staff are recommending we proceed with the next step, which is to do that consultation and see what the neighbors have to say and bring it back to the council table for all.
The council proceed to direct staff to initiate the deed process for discretionary use home-based business.
I'll second.
I just have one quick question.
Okay, open up to questions.
So you did talk to her about the parking situation and that on that street, like she's kind of aware of the.
Yeah, and so, you know, she's got a pretty long driveway there, but that doesn't help with, you know, vehicle movements for people that come in. So if, you know, someone was to come into the property and pull right up to the garage and then another customer came in after the fact, it doesn't make for easy traffic movements. You know, the zoning bylaw is silent about parking requirements for home-based business. Doesn't actually have a specific, you know, specification for the number of parking stalls related to home-based businesses. But that having been said, we do have the clause that talks about taking away from the character of the residential neighborhood through traffic movements and parking and things of this nature. And what I would propose to do is include a condition in the development permit, should council approve its issuance, that we deal directly with that specific issue and could revoke the development permit if things prove otherwise.
Okay, no, thank
I
you.
like that clause in there, that's very good.
Because we have talked about that specifically. This is a retail business. Like, I'm not used to having retail businesses permitted as a home-based business in some of the jurisdictions I've worked. It is permitted if it's accessory to the fact that you're manufacturing the products on the site, but that's not the case here necessarily. Some of the goods would be manufactured or baked on the premises, but anyway, we can deal with that as a condition of the permit.
Okay, we have motion seconder, all in favor? Okay, motion carried. Now we'll go with the other.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the second item here is another development permit application for a discretionary use for a home-based business at 1503 Bedford Drive. This would be a proposed tattoo service that would be operated out of one of the bedrooms of the two-bedroom apartment at that location. The owner has obtained approval from the owner, permission from the owner to make this application. And once again, I've advised the applicant about the notification requirements and talking to all the neighbors. One of the things I noticed in the zoning bylaw, as the regulations stand at present, is we're we're silent about, you know, we talk about circulating notice to all of the owners of property within a certain radius, but we don't talk about those that occupy property, which of course would exclude tenants. Where I come from in BC, we have to do both, which can be kind of onerous. But what I will do in this case is I will ask the apartment building owner to circulate it to the residents, or otherwise make it available if they can. Obviously, those are the people that are probably mostly affected. Once again, I don't anticipate a problem here in any way, shape, or form with compliance with the regulations. They do have a pretty big parking lot there, and the hours of operation are very limited throughout the week.
6 to 9, right, or something?
6 to 9.
Yeah, very good.
By appointment only.
By appointment only.
Is there certain conditions that are, health gets involved in that process, or?
I'm sorry,
Where, health department gets, like tattooing?
there could be, I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
Yeah.
'Cause I
Yes,
know
there
there's
is.
certain conditions they're gonna meet.
Yeah, it needs to
You'd
be
have to be.
a very specific and certified environment, so I don't know if they can make their home
I guess
compliant.
maybe just make them aware of that.
Yeah,
I think a condition of both of these should be health permits.
Yeah, you know, like I know in some of the regulations that we have, we do talk about these external third-party agencies and what have you. But I think, you know, I prefer to leave it to an applicant to have to resolve any third-party requirements on their own, because we're not there to police those third-party requirements. Now I get it; it's all about trying to promote the best and moving forward. The same would apply to food vendors and health, you know, permits and all that sort of thing. But it's just a lot more for us to have to run around and
Right.
make sure it's all addressed and.
So, for somebody starting an ice cream shop in their garage, for example, or serving food out of their garage, possibly preparing food on site, or somebody performing skin piercing art, there are very stringent health requirements. But it's not necessary, like, we can issue this license and they can never be on the radar of health until somebody gets a transmittable disease or something because they aren't following health requirements and aren't approved. So, is there at least communication between the municipality and the other third-party agencies that kind of say, hey, it's a new business in town? Because I know that health is understaffed, run around, they don't necessarily have their ear as close to the ground as maybe they should on these things.
Okay, Councillor Dudley?
Yeah, I don't see, why we would be policing somebody's at-home business like that. I have to agree with him. Like, for example, we don't go to businesses that are opening up and saying, you got your health certification. Or do we?
For running a restaurant, it's a requirement.
But did we make
If it's
you?
a food services or it's a health related, like I know in Calgary, my son does tattooing in Calgary, and I know he's required to, when he opened, he had to get an inspection from the health thing.
And so, just to end it off, like, I commend this guy for coming in, because there's been guys doing tattoos in homes for years, and this is one of the first I've ever actually seen come in and try to do it properly.
Yeah.
And if we're going to deter people, it's going to be by.
Well, it's
jumping
about
over.
supporting
Okay,
them
just
to make
keep
sure.
it down, okay. Okay,
I'm
done? Jordan?
So I guess mine is more of a point of interest. This has to go to a discretionary use, and I guess this might be better directed at the discretionary use discussion where we actually approve the discretionary use. But for me, I guess the point of interest that I would want to have is if we approve something that does not have a condition of must be health certified or follow health protocols. If we make that a condition, we enforce it. If we don't, then health has to enforce it. And I guess the question for me on the point of interest is if we don't put that in the condition of the approval, somebody does get sick, does that liability come back to the town, or is that something that is within the Ministry of Health to answer that question?
So we just provided staff with direction to proceed with an animal control bylaw, and he's the provincial jurisdiction related to exotic animals in the province's hands. very similar thing applies. I mean, I could sit here we could talk about all day about all the different requirements different types of businesses have to have, whether it be a gas station, they get a certain permit. Our job is not to consult those other jurisdictions' requirements. Sure, it can be helpful to provide notification to someone who may not know that a tattoo business requires, you know, a certain health authority approval, but, you know, once again, you know, for us to take on that ownership would put us maybe in a potential spot of liability, I don't know, any particular circumstance. I just know that we're dealing with the zoning, question of zoning,
Right.
and that's our area and scope of jurisdiction, and I'm dealing with the land use planning aspect of it.
Right.
The council's giving us direction, and we're providing them
It's
the
a-
approval to do something on their property with respect to that land use.
And to me, this ties back to the question that I have of like the gas station. If we don't make it a condition of approval that you must have a spill kit, and if they spill their gas, we don't pay for the environmental damage because it's their regulatory environment that they operate their business in. So to me, I don't think we need to see it as a condition of sale. So to me, I'm fine with just moving forward with approving the discretionary use process to go forward.
Okay, that's good.
I guess it kind of solicits the question. We allow businesses that have customers entering and exiting or attending the business within an apartment building. That's what our regulations allow currently.
R2's the high density residential district allows home-based business.
Mm-hmm.
My goal is,
I'm
you
not
know,
sure this is their intent of the bylaw. It's an interesting example of, oh, I guess that's what we permitted. So it's interesting.
It's discretionary
Yeah.
permission.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So maybe we need to look at the bylaw and add those amendments at some future point in time. If we haven't held other businesses to that standard, why are we holding this business to the standard? What I would like to see is, do we have evidence of permission from the building owner that they are allowing this?
correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if the building owner's allowing it, then,
Is there a motion on the floor yet?
So
Not yet.
let's call the
Okay,
question, all in favor?
Is
Was-
there?
Was there a motion on the floor? If not, I'll make it. That we
I'll
direct
second that
staff to
motion.
Initiate the
I'll
process.
second
Okay, 3 seconders.
All in favor?
Okay, no need to motion carried, we got 3 seconds. Okay, call the question, all in favor? Okay, motion's carried.
Just if I may, Your Worship, you know, part of the thrust of, you know, more comprehensive zoning, and then I'm gonna be looking at bringing forward to this council for its consideration would be to take home-based businesses away from the development permit process altogether. You know, I'm used to dealing with them in the context of allowing certain types of home-based businesses under more strict regulations than we currently have defined in our zoning bylaw, and just informing people about what they can and can't do and providing those regulations to them, and then, you know, the way they go, do what they're gonna do. If they require a building permit, they'll have to get that. If they require some sort of third-party approval or permit, they'll have to get that, but you know, to revisit these things time and time again, and do 2 council reports, and do all these notifications, just seems to be a little bit much, and that'll be part of my recommendations in moving forward.
Well, thanks for that.
I don't know that I've ever seen one decline.
Yeah. I'll move to enter into camera.
I'll second that.